Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you, as ever, from the Messy Time Studios on the beautiful, beautiful Atlantic coast of the last free state in America, Florida. Joining me in the studios from just down the coast in the same beautiful free state is Kurt Wuckert Jr., the chief Bitcoin historian at CoinGeek, an old friend and colleague. How are you, Kurt? Thanks for taking the time to come on.
Living the dream. Good to see you, Christopher. It feels like it's been a long time. I know we've bumped into each other a couple times, but I haven't been on the show in a good while. So
And the
good to be here.
show has faltered and stumbled because of your absence.
I'll make a point of coming more often.
Please do. I mean, I've got nothing but famous actors and politicians, and who needs them? So, one thing I wanted to dive into is something that's come up because I'm seeing encouraging signs of more what I call real world business folks who don't know much about blockchain. Right, that's just how I categorize them. They don't really have a clue, and when they do have a clue, they hear NFTs, crypto, fraud, nonsense. But more and more applications are being developed that make real use of the blockchain and solve problems that can only be solved on the blockchain, and therefore more and more people are coming to an appreciation of that. I'll kick this off with this sort of question. One of the companies that I'm working with made the point that since so much of the work, the technical work that we do is based on the public blockchain of BSV, there's a good estimate that the ecosystem becomes self-sustaining, meaning everyone can participate at 2,000 transactions per second. And currently we're at about 1.7 transactions per second. So kind of what are your thoughts on that? How does that gap get breached? Big topic, but I thought it's something you'd have some thoughts on.
No, for sure. So the halvening is coming up soon. The halvening is a ticking time bomb that's built into Bitcoin. So every 210,000 blocks, or roughly 4 years, the block reward of Bitcoin, which is how Bitcoins are distributed into circulation, it cuts in half. In 2009, it was 50 coins. We are now approaching the fifth halvening. And the distribution will be 3.125 Bitcoins as of April, sometime April this year.
So the rewards have.
Yes, the reward cuts in half, which means your revenue cuts in half. So if you're an infrastructure player in Bitcoin, you have to be thinking of ways to replace this massive haircut that you are taking in your revenue model. Now, Satoshi was very clear. Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, was very clear that the way that happens is twofold. It is the price appreciation of Bitcoin itself, and it is also a transition from block rewards to transaction volume. So Bitcoin transactions are not free, but they are cheap. And similarly to the McDonald's model of business, they may not make a whole lot of profit on every cheeseburger, but they're selling 1 billion burgers a year. And so they are one of the most profitable companies in the world off of their very slim margin and lots of volume. And so Bitcoin was designed to go that direction. And the reason for the bootstrap, I call it the bootstrapping subsidy of Bitcoin, that block reward, but it's to sort of let people get comfortable with the system and then learn the lessons on how to basically make more use, reduce friction in business and that kind of thing. And then as people realize that, hey, everything about my business could be better if I used Bitcoin instead of whatever other thing I was using for payment rails or data integrity or all kinds of other things. And then over time, and we're now 15 years into the Bitcoin experiment, so over time is starting to feel like it's been a while.
Yep.
Over time, it starts to become this self-supporting, recursive economy where transaction fees are the reason why you would mine Bitcoin or run any Bitcoin-related infrastructure. And so, yes, your colleagues were correct in saying we need to go that way for sure.
And that means, to put it in sort of capital markets terms, at that point, a miner becomes more like a broker, right? And in the sense that I'm going to get paid per transaction, and more especially a high speed broker. Right, so not like an old voice broker that says, yes, I'd like to buy 600 shares, but someone who is,
high frequency trading,
and I'm going to charge you 1 cent for 8,000 transactions and go for your life.
For sure.
So that's fine. So, and of course, the contra to that is, what are the risks to business in the ecosystem if we don't get to 2,000 transactions a second by the time the next halvening occurs and there's no more subsidy? Well, I mean, if there's no diversity of miners, the entire value of zero proof trust disappears.
Yep. There's a couple theories about this. The popular theory is that Bitcoin is itself intrinsically valuable, and so every halvening just makes it more scarce, and therefore it's just going to raise the price forever. And
I'm not in that school, so
I'm not in that school either.
What's I've heard the fantasy Ponzi scheme? What is there a solution? Or it really is we're screwed because a smaller number of miners will then charge higher prices, and you're no longer paying $1.99 on any trade. You're now paying $75 per share. Is he kind of analog?
I think, I think what it actually indicates is there's not that much demand for Bitcoin, and therefore Bitcoin is overvalued for what it is, and holding it over time is not only not a store of value, but it becomes a significant loss of value over time. And I think we've actually started to see that a little bit. Every bull market has been a little less aggressive than the last, and then it starts to taper, and then if you don't replace that subsidy, it starts to just trend down on the long term. And I think the other consequence of that is it's just like a lot of things. It probably won't go away. It's kind of like pirate radio, for example. Like you can still find guys that will broadcast to 12 listeners illegally from international waters and whatever, and it's cool. It's self-sufficient. Like there's a lot.
They're coming for me. I'm moving 14 miles further.
Exactly. And like it's interesting. It'll make a cool Netflix special or whatever, but like ultimately you're not really changing the world the way you really would think to be, because that pirate radio DJ is obviously very passionate, but he's not very effective.
Passionate's a good adjective. So but that comes to when I finally had, and I went, and it was talking to you. You were there the moment I became a big blocker from finding out there was such a dispute to choosing a side in milliseconds.
Yeah.
But the brilliance for those who don't get it is that the radical democratization of finance is what Bitcoin was always originally all about. That you can be I use this example because people get it. If you are an Indonesian maid working in Saudi Arabia and you send reals back to ringgit in your country, right now you're paying 14 or 18%.
Oh yeah.
To the scumbags known as JP Morgan and State Street in the middle. These aren't thieves. These are big businesses.
Yeah.
Whereas payment rails, and you can't buy anything on Amazon for under whatever because of 2.5% for Visa. Suddenly you can translate that value. Theoretically, that woman should be able to send 100 and basically 100% of her cash earned back to Indonesia without any friction. And we can enable that to happen by using Bitcoin BSV as the payment rail. And that's the power of it. And so
100%.
Yeah. So we need to incentivize more and more businesses to get that, because it is this weird thing where if no one trusted the dollar, like you couldn't transact with it, much like, have fun with a stack of Zimbabwean dollars and walk into a deli in Chicago and try to buy a burger, right? Not going to happen.
No.
So how do we, in your opinion, working with business, how do we make that case more and more to more kind of normal businesses or crypto cultists that in fact you being part of this ecosystem is no weirder than you being on the internet?
Well, actually, I think that's a really good analogy. So I go present on these kind of things at trade shows and stuff. I went to CES, the Consumer Electronics Show 2 years ago, with a contingent of people from the BSV blockchain space. And everybody that walked up, they're like, is this a private blockchain? Are you a big company? And I was like, no, there's 6 or 7 companies represented here, but think of it like it's 1992 and we all bought an area of a booth collectively to explain to you the internet, because that is a giant predicate piece of knowledge that you need to learn. And then these are our individual internet businesses. So it's, here's a forum management company, and here's
this guy's going to sell you books.
right. It's electronic mail, so that kind of thing.
Right.
And so
you don't have to lick a stamp. You just hit send. It's amazing.
Exactly. So there's a lot of those kind of things that people really need to understand about the blockchain, that in 20 years will be completely passe. Our children won't think of them as bizarre at all. They'll interact with them without any extra thought.
Yep.
But just like in 1992, if you were presenting about your internet business, half your brochure, half your pitch had to be about the internet itself, because most people didn't, they had a landline and they sent mail, and that's it.
Right.
So I think that's part of it. That's part of the education. But the other part is, it's actually already very powerful technology. And so if there are places where there is extreme transactional, like money friction, like your example of the Indonesian worker, that's actually really great example. So build a business that puts liquidity in a few key places, and then uses BSV as the intermediary token for instant settlement.
Yep.
Well, all of a sudden you've just undercut Western Union and everybody else, and you're charging 2% instead of 12 or whatever,
right.
and
of
which
which 99.8% of it is profit, right?
Exactly. Yes, yeah, your profit margins are massive. Like, that's all of a sudden
everybody's happy.
Yes, all of a sudden you've just disrupted a multi-trillion-dollar global industry using this technology. The other thing is data integrity. So if there's ever anything where, if there's more value to anything, if you can provably attest to its chain of custody at every step of the way, usually through a process of tokenization, there's a ton of value to be unlocked there. So those are the two key places that I tell people, should you bring your business to the blockchain? And if there is an opportunity in those two places, that's a blockchain opportunity. And BSV really is just the most scalable blockchain. So if you want your business to scale, build on, what's the analogy? Build on rock and not on sand, essentially.
Yeah. And why? What is it particularly about BSV, which is Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, versus BTC, which is the thing you see on the news? It went to $80 billion or 6 cents or whatever, hovering around true value of zero. That's my editorial. What is it about the architecture of BSV that enables? Someone last quoted me, they can give me 10,000 transactions for 2 cents. Like, why is that true? But Ethereum, I find out they do a $9 transaction and my gas fees are $8,600. Like, why is that?
So there's two major ways to bootstrap a blockchain. The Bitcoin style method uses the unspent transaction output method, or the UTXO method, which is essentially you have a ledger where all versions of the ledger are competing with each other. Now, that intrinsically, like, if you believe that capitalism brings efficiency, this should tell you that Bitcoin should scale just by people trying to say, I bet I could move the ledger faster than another person as long as there's some money in it for me.
Right.
Now, in BTC, the reason why the fees are high is instead of letting the free market choose how fast people are willing to compete, they throttle it down to 1 megabyte every 10 minutes. So you can compete, but you can only compete inside of this extremely narrow thing. So imagine if there was only one road between New York and Washington, D.C., and it was one lane, and you could only go one direction, and there was toll booths at either side. There was throttling all traffic. How expensive is that toll road?
Right.
Very expensive, right? Like, you only make that drive if you have to make that drive.
You could have the Model T in any color you want as long as it's black.
Yes. So it's a command economy. They have pre-planned how much commerce can occur on that network.
How did communism grab a hold of Bitcoin?
That's a very
not a loaded question.
So actually, I think a big part of it is the fact that a lot of anarchists who are into tech think they are libertarians and are actually communists. They desire to be big time. So here's the thing: if you were to talk to, like, Lenin, for example, before all the Soviet stuff got really bad,
right,
he probably would have been an interesting guy to talk to. He would be talking about, oh, we're going to liberate all these people. We're all going to be freer. It's going to be
broke
great.
And hungry, and these assholes are buying $50,000 Fabergé eggs.
Yes.
Yeah, but we've had enough of that.
As soon as you start to get into that transitional period, they're too philosophical. And so when people start to do communism wrong, well, now they're undesirables. Now you need to be taught a lesson. And now, okay, that lesson didn't work. And then all of a sudden there's, a multi-million person culling of undesirable people.
We're going to get down to the last 6 of you who agree with me.
Yes.
The Pol Pot method of country building.
Yes. And I think in Bitcoin, given that you have lots of very, very smart, but very, very philosophically motivated and very technical people that are arguing about the granular details of the right way to bootstrap the future economy, this new technocratic blah, 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 blah. You start to get, and also a very high occurrence of like high functioning and high IQ autism, I think are
Yeah.
very
Who
key.
we do not want in charge of anything except a bridge maintenance and automotive design.
Yes. And so these people have put themselves in a position where they sort of have this developer oligarchy on the right way to do Bitcoin. And it is just kind of by default turned into a place where if you make the wrong decisions, if you are an undesirable in any way, you're cut out of the conversation. And it just has kind of become this authoritarian thing on that side. So it's really sad, frankly. But BSV on the flip side, and we have our own autists, believe me, but we take
Can
take
we
a
have
position.
an autism in chief? Is that like a role we can have?
You know what? I'm all for it.
We've got one. And he's a fun guy.
Yes.
Nah, we're not referring to that child. Boring. Don't care.
Yeah, no, not going there.
I wish him well.
So on the flip side, basically what BSV says is, okay, we're taking Bitcoin, but we are going to remove all of the sort of intelligentsia inserted protocol limits to the size of the economy. And then we will let these things be emergent. Essentially, we're trying capitalism at this scale. If somebody wants to try to process 1 billion transactions a day, cool. If they fail, not the network. And
right.
Cool. So fundamentally, it's a very philosophical thing. It's economic security. It's not a technical solution that makes BSV better. It's actually the humility to understand that you cannot program desirable outcomes. Sometimes you just have to set a thing in motion and let people compete to make it as good as they can.
We should draft up a memo and send that to Washington, D.C. They may not know.
they may not. In fact, I would argue they almost certainly don't know.
All evidence points to them not knowing. So
yes,
perhaps we should just send a link and everything will be perfect.
Indeed. So to answer the other half of your question, something like Ethereum. So Ethereum is a fundamentally different style network. So it demands that the entire network works like a single computer. So it is a distributed system, but the whole network can only be as fast as the slowest computer that is participating in consensus. So it must cross every threshold at the speed of the slowest computer, which
is really dumb.
Again, is kind of the same like communist problem, but it's a little bit of it's like a 30% twist of the tourbillon to make that happen.
Really,
so
is the technical term for that stupid?
Yes. No, absolutely.
That seems
more languages than
dumb.
one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That is it. Again, I did not know that particular concept of why. I just know that the gas fees, the transaction fees are ridiculous.
Yeah. So it creates a different throttling problem. And then the throttling problem is just like anything else. Like there's too much traffic on the tollway, so the toll is going up until the traffic goes down.
Right.
And that's it.
And so the last idiot in his Lamborghini felt it was really okay to pay $600,000 to drive to Chicago. And then the next one, the next toll paid was $40 because there was a long gap before someone was like, waiting. I like that idea of all the cars waiting, watching the toll price come down on a board, and then finally like, I'll take it.
Well, it's funny because they talk about it that way. They talk about hey, we created this really beautiful site that calculates fees for you in real time. It gives you these fee estimates, and if you're in a hurry, you should pay around this, and if you're not in such a hurry, so they've turned it into almost a marketing opportunity, and in fact, they've turned it into this notion of think of it like a really valuable illiquid asset. So what if you had like
that's where the stupidity comes in, right?
Yes.
Because anything that and I try to explain this to people about like carbon markets, anything that is created by legislative fiat or political will is not an asset.
Right.
It's fleeting ephemera, and it's a game of musical chairs. If you happen to have been the guy that sold your chair to the next idiot just before it all ended, good for you. But it was always it was always a rent tax on the real economy.
For
and
sure.
a distraction. And why? So that's
Yep.
why BSV makes all the sense in the world to
Yep.
drive forward, because as a conveyor of value, as an attestation chain for the kind of immutable public record that this is what happened, you can't change that, which you can if it's privately held.
Yes.
That is awesome and useful, much like the internet, but no one is paying $19 to go to a new URL because that's ridiculous.
Correct.
Right? You gotta think it's, I mean, for example, those who would choose to type in messytimes.show, that is worth what, $80,000-$90,000 a click. I mean, that delivers value.
For
But
sure, yeah.
for anything else like the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg, I mean, penny, half a penny.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that the payment rails of the internet by now are they're invisible to people, as you say, they're invisible.
Yeah, they're
Whereas back in 95, 96, you were actually calculating your cost to connect to your local ISP.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine, a brilliant guy, right? He happened to be 2 years older than me in high school, went to MIT, and he was one of the first guys I ever heard saw internet. And he and his bunch of pals were busy screwing around with all this equipment. I visited his apartment in Boston, and it was just chock-a-block with shit, and he looked like a lunatic. But they created like 4 or 5 of the first ISPs in New England and sold that to, I don't know who they sold it to, AOL, but like they cashed out at 23 years old for multiple millions of dollars in 1994. Awesome. It was absolutely phenomenal. But new opportunities come up, and today's Bitcoin farms are kind of that equivalent. If you were smart enough to get in and do that.
Well, in fact, I make that analogy. So I run a mining pool, and I tell people all the time that over the next 5 or so years, I expect Bitcoin mining to be very old hat sounding. I want us to be something to the effect of like Web3 ISP or something like that, because it's exactly what we are. We are the infrastructure of this new everything network. People think of it as financial, and it starts as financial, but it's everything else too.
It's data. Yeah. You have to make sure that
data,
that competing for that ledger value. I think the guy, the Italian that came up with double entry bookkeeping would be fascinated that it turned into a high speed competitive sport.
Yes.
That's kind of fascinating.
It is. Absolutely.
Well, and any final thoughts? I am trying to deliver nuggets of brilliance and enlightenment in shorter bursts these days. This is insanely invaluable. Is there something I missed? Is there some nugget of genius that we should convey?
I mean, this could be a 10-hour podcast, and we wouldn't get through all the cool stuff.
And we would be, let's be clear, riveting.
Yes.
Riveting. On the edge of your seat,
men talking
make
Bitcoin.
More popcorn. Really exciting stuff.
Yes.
I think for that audience of 6 out there.
For me, I always like to break it all into, everything's on one side and BSV is on the other. The thing on the one side is that the value that they convey is about the value of the asset. So it's the Ether or the BTC token or the Litecoin or the Dogecoin or whatever. That's where they think the value is. In BSV, we're the only people that say, no, it is not the asset value. The valuable asset is A, the data that is on the blockchain, and B, it is the other commerce that becomes liberated by that technology. Yep. So ultimately, I want to see another 4 billion people connected to the global economy and have the opportunity to be the best inventor in the world or the best entrepreneur or whatever else. Because I want to live in a world where there's not just 4 billion people that have access to the internet that can work in the world, but what if it was all 8? That how much better does the world get if we double the amount of people that are competing to create efficiencies and make their own place in the world?
Yeah. It's the astronomical. It's the great, because having worked in sub-Saharan Africa for going on 30 years now, the greatest things I've seen of those changes, they leapfrogged fixed telecom infrastructure. They went right to cellular. So that was brilliant, right? You skipped all that cost.
Exactly.
And you've got, some of those brilliant applications I've seen are illiterate farmers who have a phone and they basically play a game where they understand prices, literacy or not. They get big number, right? So they're numerate and they're semi-literate, obviously, with the phone, but it's basically they gamified it. And how many of your sheep do you want to sell? Bum, 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 bum. Are they big, small, or little? Bum, 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 bum. And what's the current price? How much can I get for that in Addis Ababa right now? Bum, bum. Take it. Like, they are entering into a commodity market without even being literate. It's actually kind of awesome, right? And think of the empowerment that gives their children to radically change, first off, how they receive information. Everyone knows the government's lying to them all the time, every government constantly. And it's a comforting fact that you can rely on that. And in some places more deadly than others. And in places where it has been proven to be terribly deadly, in like the Central African region for 20 years, the ability to actually get reliable information about, you really should leave your village today because Boko Haram is coming through. Good heads up ball right there. That's like kind of get a hurricane warning in Florida.
Valuable information.
Time to go. Get the girls. Let's go. So I see a lot of promise there, and I'm throwing a lot of work from an old school boring fintech guy into putting business applications on BSV, because that's where the future will be. And it will, as you say, it'll be invisible to people the way the internet protocols are now.
For sure.
So, well, Kurt, always a joy. Thank you very much for coming on again. Don't be a stranger to the studios.
For sure.
And to my loyal listeners, please turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you and tune into Messy Times.